Welcome, everybody. Welcome to our first episode of Conversations Unleashed. I'm Erica Clark-Alejo. I'm super excited to be here today with the amazing Stephanie Chen Banjo. Hello.
Hello. Thanks for having me here today, everyone. My name is Stephanie Chen Banjo, and excited for the talk on imposter syndrome.
Yeah. Since it's our first episode, I thought I would just back up for a minute and talk a little bit about how we ended up here on this super fun talk show. It's going to be fun. And just why it came up and why it's so important for me. So as some of you may know or may not know, I've owned a business for over 20 years, and it's been interesting along my journey. And before I sort of worked with businesses, worked with a lot of individuals, but now I work with a lot of business owners. And I find that there's a lot of topics that are not talked about, topics that are talked about. And I thought it would be really fun to just bring it into a place where we can have a conversation about it. And so it sort of started with Stephanie and I, which is why I'm super honored that she's one of my first guests on here, is I really wanted to explore the topic more of imposter syndrome. So I work with a lot of clients on it. Not everybody knows what it is, but I was looking for somebody else that was just wanted to jam out and just talk about this topic and what it means. And Stephanie and I just got on with no agenda that day. And we just started talking about what does this topic mean for people? What does this topic mean for us? What does it mean for our clients? And I was like, wait, we have to take this conversation and put it in front of a larger audience and just have it. So today, and each day that we have conversations Unleashed, we're going to just deconstruct topics. So it's not us necessarily sitting here and doing some big PowerPoint presentation or anything. It's just us being able to talk about it and bring it to the table. So it is interactive for some of you that are watching it on certain platforms. So I know Facebook will allow you to drop in comments. LinkedIn will allow you to drop in comments. Feel free to drop them in. If this is resonating with you at any time, pop in the box. We love to say hello to everybody, but also just if you have any questions, pop them in. We will answer them. So even if we don't answer them live on the show today, we will go back in and make sure that we answer it or provide insight or just chat with you as well. That's important to us. Anything else to add before I get going, Stephanie?
Nothing else. You take it away, and I'm here ready to go.
Well, I want to talk about who you are, because I just again, you do such amazing and powerful work. I know that you help mid-level professionals launch into senior level positions by uncovering and using their unique leadership superpowers. Can you tell us a little bit more about it? And then we'll start with the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for the introduction. So I'm a leadership and career coach, and the space that I absolutely love working with is just working with people who are ambitious and driven. And you can just tell from the moment you speak with them, they have this fire in their eyes. They're ready to take on the world. They want to make an impact. They talk about legacy and wanting to make their lives count. And so they have these big, lofty dreams and goals in terms of where they want to go. And yet they are at a point where they need to make some decisions. So a profile of people that I work with a lot are, hey, I've made it on paper. If you look at my resume, I have it all. And yet they've realized that the fuel that has driven them up to that day has run on anxiety, stress, imposter syndrome, the faking it till you make it. And they realize, wow, that was an exhausting hustle. Can I keep growing, go to that next level of leadership? Can I make a real difference and be that influencer and thought leader I want to be, and not sacrifice and trade off my well-being, my sleep, my relationships, the quality of my life outside of work? So that's the big question. And sometimes it seems like a paradox. And what we work on often is to say, yes, you can't necessarily have it all, but you can figure out a way to have your all. And we design and create their own little playbook, if you will, in terms of how they really do that.
So imposter syndrome really is integral in that for you and working with your clients. You see it show up for them.
Absolutely, because these are people who thrive off of challenges and off of growth. And oftentimes, even though they know that, when you're in that middle of, okay, I'm ready to launch off this phase into this next phase, whether it's a promotion, taking on a new leadership role, or just showing up with more presence and audacity and assertiveness, that's that jump. That's where imposter syndrome shows up. So we'll talk about it, but one of the first things I'll say to them actually is, and they always have a reaction. I'll say, congratulations. And they're like, what are you talking about? I'm like, this tells me that you have had the boldness to say yes to the next thing, to taking that risk and putting yourself out there. And that's just the start. But yes, absolutely, it is part of the journey and an expected part of it showing up with people who want to continue to rise and challenge themselves. Yet it doesn't always need to feel so hard. And there are definitely ways that we can peel back the curtains on where we address it, help you see different perspectives, and even some practical questions and thought processes that you can walk yourself through in those moments, so you don't just like freeze, clamp down, and just like go into fight, flight, freeze mode.
I know that I'm going to actually back up too, because I feel like I know some people, and I've been surprised that when I said, oh, I'm going to talk about imposter syndrome, they're like, what's that? Or I've never heard of that. Or people, when they say how they feel and then I name it and like, oh, this is imposter syndrome, people are like, I've never heard of it, which surprises me, but doesn't, because I only learned about it, 5-6 years ago. But I feel like, just for sake of everybody watching, like defining, like for me, how I define imposter syndrome is sort of doubting your abilities. So feeling like somebody at any moment is going to tap you on the shoulder and be like, hey, you're out of here. So you feel like sort of a fraud in that position you're in or what you're doing. And feeling like everyone else knows so much and you know nothing, even though you have accomplishments, you have experience, you have skills, you have knowledge of all of these things, and you're deserving of all of the accolades, but yet you still feel like somebody's gonna be like, get out. Like, you really don't know. And there's other people that are better than you. Do you have anything for that? Like, how do you define it?
Yeah, I would define it in two ways. I think the first way is really similar to what you just said. It's like, no matter where you are, no matter how many certificates and trophies and awards and things externally you can point to and say, I am good enough, I deserve to be here. It's almost like no matter how much you have, there's still that nagging, let's say, gap on the inside where you're like, there is something still missing. And I have some thoughts as to where that comes from. But I think that another way I would define it, that probably also speaks to broader systemic issues in terms of what it means to feel like you belong and feel safe in a place. The other way I look at it is just being in a circumstance, an environment, among a group of people where you actually just don't feel safe to be who you are and bring your full self to the table without fear of backlash, rejection, retribution, etc.
It's hard to like show up authentically as yourself sometimes when you're not feeling maybe your best.
Yeah, exactly. And which is why, and tell me if I'm like leading us like totally down a rabbit hole.
No, let's go. I'm ready.
Yeah, you're like rabbit holes. Well, which is why I think, and we've touched on this, you and I, in our previous conversations, which is why when we talk about imposter syndrome, we always need to talk about it with two perspectives on. One is the internal work that we need to do as individuals, regardless of who, what, where, why, the external circumstances.
Yeah.
Right. It's like that internal work that we need to do inside of ourselves to monitor our self-talk, take ownership for it, and say, hey, the things that we're feeding ourselves, that's the fuel we're giving our bodies and our minds to run off of. And to recognize, and to also not give into black and white messages, either or, like, I'm just either cut out for this or I'm not, like, or I failed or I succeeded. Generally, imposter syndrome has us trying to make judgment calls about ourselves or other people in very black and white binary terms. And so one of the tricks is to be able to step back and deconstruct it and say, well, what do I know? What did I do well? Where could I improve for next time? And start to like tease out the nuances. And that's one of the, I would say, antidotes of imposter syndrome, actually breaking it down. Where do you feel like an imposter? Is it because you don't feel a sense of belonging and safety, or is it because there's actually a skill you haven't yet mastered? And then there's, oh,
can I interrupt
Oh,
before you move on to the external part, like the internal?
Yes.
I think too that even like where can you, what can you do different next time? But I think there's a little bit in that, like not also being afraid to fail, like also being willing to try and to push in a little bit of that. Like it's an uncomfortable place to be, but still knowing like it's okay, and your relationship to failure could be different as well when we deal with imposter syndrome. So I just wanted to like drop that in there.
No, that totally makes sense. Exactly. It's not even just like the messages that we tell ourselves and all, like there's a willingness and acceptance of saying, when imposter syndrome shows up, it's likely that you have put yourself willingly or unwillingly into a new space where there might need to be, there are going to be chances where you need to, where there are going to be learning curves, right? And so I think it's being willing to fail and not have it mean you're a failure. It just means you maybe didn't nail this one thing. And to stop assigning like our results and outcomes to who we are. It's like, how can we separate that? It's like, you are good, period. And in this particular area of this role or in this particular stage of your life, like there are things you're doing well always, and there are always things that you can improve on. And that willingness to fail, like you're saying, Erica, is a huge one that I see in my clients. It's not even failing, but it's like the willingness, like being okay to say, okay, I'm okay to even put myself in situations and conversations where I could mess up a little bit.
Yeah, and I wish we had like a different word for it than failure. Like we need to come up with something else, because I think that it's like also saying, hey, being willing to fail, but fail feels like something, but it's also like willing to be able to try, willing to be able to just do and not attached to the outcome, or be okay with the outcome, knowing that you can adjust. But it feels like, I always feel like the failure word, it just needs something different.
Right. Yeah. Because failure is like that, the end result judgment on like how it happened versus all the wording you were using before is on the process and the kind of, what you bring to the table, all the things you can control. It's like being willing, and all of that. So maybe, that's definitely a great distinction. It's like, instead of like, let's putting labels on the end results. Is it a failure? Is it a success? Like, how can we shine a light more and laud and celebrate the willingness to engage in the mess of the process in itself?
It's like, it's like the experience as opposed to the success or the failure. It's just the experience of that event happening.
Yes. Yeah. Yep.
Well, let's talk about some of the external, because I know you and I, so everybody that's listening, we didn't script this out. We didn't really have we have to say these things or ask these certain questions. But when we were sort of just brainstorming like some ideas on the topic that we might want to focus on, we started with one, and Stephanie and I started going back and forth, and I was like, wait, let's just deconstruct this on the call. Let's just talk about it in front of everyone. So I know it has to do some with that external part. So will you continue on with that part?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I am, and thanks for bringing that up. And I think that's so clever, right? Because we could try to figure it out beforehand. What's the right answer? But that's the beauty. There's so many different perspectives. And the more we share between the both of us, the more hopefully it gives people who are listening to this some tools and perspectives. But I was reflecting on, I think it was the question of, I can't remember what the question was.
Well, we shared an article. That was that article, I think. Maybe was that one?
Yes, it was talking about how to stop, telling people they have imposter syndrome. And so I started to think, like, what is it, right? Start off with the basics, like, what is it? And I realized that oftentimes I would hear it talked about in an either or context. It's either about the bigger systemic issues in our society, in our cultures, in the world, right? Everything outside of us, or it's all about you, your self-talk, how you see yourself, your relationship with yourself, all that, right? Like the internal stuff. And neither one is right or wrong, better or worse. I just think that they both need to be brought together into one conversation where we can weave them together. and know that sometimes it's going to be more the external systemic aspects that causes or has planted the seeds for imposter syndrome. And sometimes it's going to be like, okay, we have to own this, right? Like the whole world can change, the whole system can start working in my favor, and yet I still have some ways that I see myself and think about life and others in the world that I need to clean up in my own head. So some of it, I think, relates to ownership, right? And so I'm a very visual person. I started drawing this out. I kind of sketched it on a piece of paper and I like texted it to Erica. I was like, Erica, is it like this? And so what I drew was just like a little pie. And I said, and of course you can't quantify these things, right? But I said, 40% would be due to external systemic issues that at least plant the seed for, have laid the groundwork for creating a system where that works for some people and doesn't work for other people. So of course, the people who it doesn't work for, when they go into that system, like it makes sense. They don't feel like they belong. They can contribute. Their ideas are worthy, et cetera. And then I said 60%, this is like your own internal view of yourself, your relationship with yourself, and your willingness to move past narratives of feeling like you need to earn everything to be okay and worthy, but actually just stepping up to the plate and be willing to like get in the mess, make some mistakes, and still be okay and keep growing. And I was like, well, I made it that one, the internal one, 60%, because then it gives people hope and maybe a level of empowerment to say, okay, at the end of the day, there's all these things wrong with the system, with the world, and yet I still have the power and the ownership to take my next step, decide how I want to show up, how I want to respond to this, not just react out of fear. And then the 40% was the external. So I shared that with you, and I'd love to hear, Erica, like what has been spinning in your mind since then that you want to bring to the table?
No, it was so great because I was like, is it really 60-40? And it's like, trying to like argue this number, which I know is super arbitrary, but I was like, you're right. I think more than 50% is definitely the internal. It's like the parts that we need to acknowledge. But I was like, is it really 40% external? And I'm like, I think it's super situational. So probably like in a corporate environment, like I'll say like IT world, corporate environment 10, 20 years ago, it was a certain, right, a demographic, a lot of males, in this demographic. And then as a female coming in, I think, we're sitting at like a big 40%. So because of like, that's a huge external factor there. So not only is like, hey, I feel like a fraud, but yet it's like you're breaking barriers, you're doing these things. But I'll go to my own personal experience because I feel like that's important to share as well. I've experienced imposter syndrome off and on through my life in different places. And I used to teach at one of our local colleges and did so for many years. And early on in my career, I was like, yeah, I'll teach, I'll go. And I just teach and do, and it was no big deal. But sort of towards the later part of that career, as I was teaching, I would walk into the classroom and be like, I don't know anything. Like, I don't think I should be teaching. I'm like, what if I'm teaching them the wrong information? Now, some of these classes I've been teaching a long time. So my curriculum was pretty set, most years it was the same, but I was like, maybe I don't know what I'm saying. Maybe I'm teaching them all the wrong stuff. And like, if somebody, didn't pass, it was like, oh my gosh, they didn't pass because I'm a terrible teacher and because of all these things. And I started having this narrative with myself often when I'd walk into that classroom, which was, several times a week. And it became, I can't say the word is debilitating, but it became a lot because I realized like I wasn't showing up the best because there was this little like fear inside me that our dean was going to be like, Erica, you're out. You have no idea what any of this means. Like, like you don't know sign language. You don't know anything. You're out. And, but the more experience I got and the more I learned, the more I felt that. And so for me in that internal versus external, I look at the college, it's made up of a lot of women. There's a lot of minorities on our campus. I never felt like an outsider as a way of like demographics or my skill level. I had the same degrees as most of the people on campus, that kinds of stuff. So for me, it was like probably 90% mindset and internal, and then 10%. But then I look at other times when I've been in other situations and sort of had those uneasy feelings, and I'm like, whoa, right? It's like 5149. So it's not about the number, but understanding like different situations have impacted in different ways, and it can fluctuate depending on where you're at and who you're around and the situation.
Right. Thanks for sharing that. I really liked what you said at the end there to almost like summarize your takeaway. It's almost like it's less important that we come to this magical number and proclaim this is it, right? It's more about what I hear from what you're saying, that awareness to be in a situation and be able to identify and say, okay, hey, this is mostly me here. And I think once you have versus I think I'm pretty straight up here, but I really sniff out there's something in the environment and the culture that is just working against me. As much as I own my stuff, right? Step to the plate, there just are going to be some factual things. So I think maybe it's that skill to discern, where does you take ownership over, kind of overcoming and continuing and being resilient, et cetera. And where to maybe identify and have some conversations, uncomfortable ones, and start to call out some of the other things externally that might be present as well.
Yeah. A lot of the research shows that, I mean, the more high performing you are, the more that you can experience it, which I think is just fascinating. All that. So I feel like we could talk like a whole day on just that part. But then I think you're right there. I mean, there's this like part of just sort of acknowledging it and just saying, wait, what am I owning? What do I need to have change around? Like what change around me needs to happen?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Well,
like processing out loud. So I'm like, does that make sense what I'm trying to say? But
it does. And it links to what we were talking about earlier as well, where I think sometimes, especially when you give something a label and you say like imposter syndrome, I think that in itself has certain like, I think it triggers certain things in people. You're like, this is a thing. This is who I am, or this is something I have forever. And it puts you in a very like, a very black and white space, for lack of a better word. It's almost like you either have it or you don't. And I think what you're saying is that once you have the awareness and ask it always from those two perspectives, okay, what's something factual I can observe about the external that might be contributing to this or perpetuating it? And what about me? What about the way I'm, showing up, my confidence levels can I work on?
Yeah.
So that way it keeps the conversation flexible. And I think it keeps you moving forward versus just like, oh my gosh, I can't do anything unless this whole system changes. Or it's all me. I need to be a different person for, to feel okay.
Yeah. And I think the label is like a double-edged sword. Like there's a part of the label that's like that, don't be held to it and be like, oh, well, it's imposter syndrome, so I can sit here in this and just do it. But there's also the idea of like, when you name it, it just settles down. Like it sort of normalizes like, wait, and I don't know, like the stats really do range. Most consistently, I see about 70% of people have experienced it at some point or another through their life, whether they realize it or not. But when you read online, the stats are like between like 5 and 85% of the people, but I think at some point, just being able to, like we talk about the antidotes, but that being able to just say, oh, wait, this is what I'm experiencing in this moment. This is imposter syndrome. Here's the internal, here's the external, here's these pieces, can help it just be at bay. It helps like normalize it so you can be able to make those decisions and move on, like sort of educated decisions to be able to move on without being just like, why am I feeling this way? Why am I stuck? Why am I not choosing to put my programs out to the world? Why am I choosing to avoid all of these things when you can be like, oh, wait, it's because I feel like an imposter. I feel like a fraud in my own life at this moment.
Yeah. Yeah. I like that point. I think the naming it to tame it, I think there's something very freeing and in being able to call it out, then you're less caught up in your emotions in your head. You're just like, oh, this is what it is. Okay, now what do I choose to do with it?
Yeah. What are other ways that you've seen people to overcome it, like with the individuals that you work with?
Yeah. So, I primarily work with professionals in the corporate space. And I think 2 examples really come to mind. And as I was thinking through them, I was like, I see a pattern here. It's really interesting. So if I step back for a second, I think oftentimes they, imposter syndrome emerges in the corporate space when you are either doing so well that you're now afraid of, it's almost like being called out for being too good and not being one of us anymore. And maybe you shouldn't be there. So it's almost like that you're flying too high, and therefore you're like not part of the crowd. Because I think, you know, a lot of in this slice of the world that I deal with, a lot of the imposter syndrome has to deal with that kind of herd mentality. Like we have been kind of conditioned, and I think it's part of our physiology to want to connect and stay together. And I think that when people are moving so quickly, because I work with some like really star performers, and the bottom of their imposter syndrome is like, when we've gotten to the bottom of it, it's like, I'm afraid I'm outshining everyone, and people that used to manage me, I'm going to be managing them now. And I'm just afraid we're going to lose that connection. They're not going to see me as someone they can relate to. They're going to resent me, etc. And so they're starting to question whether they even deserve these higher levels, because it's risking so much that they used to have in terms of camaraderie and their peers. And then the other one is on the other side, where it's like you are, you know, you're so, I guess, you don't want to be too behind. You're kind of looking up, and everyone's ahead of you in knowledge, expertise, years of experience. And so you're also in a way sticking out, because like, let's say everyone's up here in this space, and you're like, but I'm here, I'm the one who's left out. So I think often, I don't know if it sounds too reductive, but sometimes when I was looking at those examples, I was like, a lot of it is just that, like, a desire to belong, to be accepted, to be seen and embraced, like for who you are. And I think a lot of that gets risked when you like fly high in an organization, when you're like still catching up. And I think some of the let's call them antidotes, or some of the things that they've realized and practiced that help them. So for that client that I was working with, who was he just kept on getting promoted. He was like, you know, the first Black male to make partner in this multinational company. It was huge, right? And he just kept on getting promoted. And I think for him, it realized that he in a nutshell, he realized that it was his career dreams and the impact he wanted to make. It was more important than the discomfort he felt at having some of those conversations and pushing the envelope and challenging people. So in other words, some of it was kind of solidifying and clarifying his dreams, his vision for what he wanted his life and career to mean. And then when he had that as his North Star, it started to become worth it. All right, even though it's uncomfortable, even though I may alienate some people because they're no longer looking at me as a peer, this is what it's all for. And so he clung on to that North Star, and that's what helped him stay grounded, even through all of the upward successes he had. The other client, and then I'll finish after this. I know I haven't talked.
You're good.
The other client realized that it was around her values. So this is like a cerebral, highly intellectual, you know, lawyer. And you know, when we started talking about values, I was like, I don't know if this is going to feel too, you know, qualitative for her, right? But she latched onto it so much. She was like, oh my goodness, like I have been holding myself back because I'm afraid of putting myself out there. But when I realized that these are the things that really matter, it's because I want to advocate for women like me in the legal field. I really value pushing the envelope and asking the hard questions that could lead to bigger systemic changes. And all of that was uncomfortable. But when she realized, hey, this is a part of who I am, this is like why I'm here and what it's all for. When she realized that, she's like, okay, because I now know that, that's going to be my fuel to help me navigate those tough moments when I don't feel like I should say something, when my opinion doesn't matter, when I don't have the right to really assert myself here. She's like, no, but what is it all for? Because of these things that I value and are important. So those are some examples of how they show up. Yeah.
No, that's really good. I think because I think it just translates all across the board of like how it can show up in different places. But I'll say like the clients that I work with is more one-on-one. And when I work with them, they're building out programs to be able to put out, right? To be able to put in their business, but you're stepping into a place of now teaching people. And there's some funny switch that happens with people when they're like, hey, I have all these skills, I can do all these things, but now I actually want to teach someone in a different capacity than just like, okay, I'm running a business working one-on-one, but I'm like sharing this knowledge with the greater people, that people can sort of clam up and be like, who am I to do this? Like, who am I to now say that I can teach someone to do that? And I think it's just really interesting, even as business owners. I'll share one other experience for myself is like, sometimes even just like earlier this week, it happened where there was this moment, I was like coming in from the car and I was thinking about something and I was like, oh my gosh, who am I to be doing this? Who am I? Like, yeah, that's always the question I end up asking myself, like, who am I to be doing this? And then I was like, oh wait, that's imposter syndrome. Like recognizing in that moment. But for my clients really to be able to see that they are the experts, and it's not, like helping them be able to step into that space and to be able to like own their power and to be able to own the fact that they have so much, they can impact so many people with where they are at like today in this world, I think is just so powerful to like help them step in there and help them recognize it. The other place that I see it is like sometimes people will avoid doing things. Especially I work with leaders and stuff as well. And sometimes there is that avoidance to stuff. I think like you mentioned, the one lawyer who is, climbing the ranks but it's like sacrificing something that you believe in because sort of you're worried how it's going to be perceived, because you think that it's not going to be good enough. And so people ends up just retracting. And I just like part of my whole mission in my business is like, I just want people to be able to share their gifts with the world. Like I just want people to be able to scream from the rooftops and be able to share and to impact others and stuff. And it just like, I see it when they just start to clam up. So I love the analogy that you've used is like that North Star, because I talk a lot about like alignment with your vision and where you want to go and your values. And are like, if you're clamming up, are you upholding your values? Are you living your vision? Are you working towards it? But your idea of using that as the North Star is just priceless, of being able to like hold on to this thing to be able to get you there. So I appreciate you sharing it with me and with others.
I'm so curious, as you were painting a picture of how it shows up for some of your people, and even just like how specific you are about that distinction between like, I've built up these skills, now something about now teaching it is what really sparks that imposter syndrome. What has been in putting you on the spot a little bit, but like what is an example of something that maybe one of your clients has realized that has been, even if it seems like a small insight, like what's been a thing that has helped them be able to kind of, I don't know if it's overcome, but really kind of navigate that? Like what's an example of something they would have realized or changed in themselves?
Yeah, I think sometimes it's just going back to the impact that they've already created and just taking a moment to recognize how far they have come, and can sometimes make that switch to be like, oh yeah, you're right. I helped all these people do X, Y, Z, even before I had my business or while I'm in my business or last week or last year. I had these moments I was so proud of, and being able to like sort of latch onto those and say, wait a minute, yes, I have something. My voice is valid. So I think that's one of that. And then the other one is I tell my clients sometimes just stop comparing yourself to other people. Like, some of it's just like, stop. Like if you're in an environment where you're doing that, then maybe that's not the environment for you. You know what I mean? Like find a new crowd to be with if they're sort of that always feeling like you're comparing and doing. So I think those two things can be very powerful. Look at the environment that you're in. My people have a little bit more control over where they're putting themselves probably than maybe your clients do in the corporate world. And then also just recognizing like how far they've come and latching onto their accolades.
Got it. I like those. And I, when you were saying the comparison part as well, just to then draw that parallel, I know we want to almost like draw themes of like, how does imposter syndrome show up even in such different career choices, industries, et cetera. And that comparison one is actually really huge as well. And, exactly, because sometimes it isn't as, it both is and it isn't in terms of like just switching or just changing jobs or quitting, right? Like sometimes it is, and sometimes it's like, there's a little bit more to it that they have to work through. But one of the things that my clients find very comforting is because their comparison engine is so high, because that's kind of how we were raised. This is a whole nother conversation that, we use quantitative measurements for not just how well we're doing, but like how good we are as a person. We equate our achievements with like who we are. And so, of course, like we use all of these signs of success to not just say, how well am I doing? It's how good am I? How okay am I as a person, right? And so one of the phrases that I use often is like, don't stop comparing yourself. Don't stop comparing yourself. Just stop comparing yourself to others and start comparing yourself with your own version of success.
Love
Your
it.
own, yeah, you're just like flip it back. Versus other people, they're like, it's so much pressure. They're like, I can't stop comparing. And, it's like, okay, like, chill. Like, you don't need to stop comparing. Just like just change the baseline. The baseline's not everyone else.
Yeah.
Their opinions, their pats on the backs. Like, the baseline is just you. Like, where are you trying to go? How well did you show up for yourself today and your goals? Stay accountable to them. How well do you know what matters to you? And did you live out your small choices every day according to those?
I'm going to show this graphic. I know I showed you right before, so I'm going to pull it up real quick if that's okay.
Yes.
So this is sort of imposter syndrome in a nutshell of like what you feel like you know compared to what others know. And when you said all of that stuff about don't compare yourself to others, I always talk to my clients about like when Tony Robbins came out with teaching people how to make courses. And when he first did, I was like, oh, I just shrunk into this little bitty circle right here. Cause I was like, oh my gosh, he's like super successful in my definition of it. And all of these stuff. So there was this moment, and then I was like, wait a minute. I was like, okay, not everybody resonates with him. Not everybody wants to resonate with him. And then I was like, wait, I know. Here, I'm going to show the next slide, but maybe if I can get there. But I know that, like, I know just as much. I just know things maybe in a different way, or I have my own secret sauce to things. So that's what the other thing that came to me is like, it's not even about like comparing yourself to other people, but it's like you have something special that no one else on this planet brings to the table. And there are people out there that are going to resonate with that. So for me, I mean, and again, yours is a little bit more corporate. Mine is a little bit like more as like the business owners and stuff that I work with. But it's like, I just want to say to people, be like, you have your own special sauce. You have something that you have that's special to offer, and you know just as much as other people. It may look very different, and there is some overlap in those things, but like just own it. I think that's like that's where we started, right? Like
there you go. Owning it, right? And to speak to your graphic as well, it's almost like people need to own it, and also recognizing that it takes work to really, because we've spent all of our lives with our focus on other people. What are all the success measures that they say I need to have? So if you think about your time, your energy, your focus, you've been studying what it looks like to be successful based on how others have defined it. So in addition, so it's almost like, so if you look at your circle, like when you're kind of in that left, the small, what I feel like I know, you're creating so much space for other people. You're studying their work. You're looking at why they're better at you, what they know. And that's great to an extent if you want to use it from like a data-driven perspective. Let me gather the data. What other things can I learn? But what it also asks of you is that personal investment, which is why I think like coaching is great, right? It gives you that space for yourself to carve out time and space and energy and reflection to say, okay, well, what do I know? It might be a little different. What are the unique things I bring to the table? What's a certain angle I can come at that may align with people, that really would be helpful. And, it's almost like around developing your leadership brand. It may not look the same as everyone, but does take some time to cultivate it and take a look. And you can only do that once you take your focus off others and turn it inwards to create the space for reflection. And that's when that circle can grow bigger to match your right-hand side.
And it gets hard though, right? It gets hard to sometimes, it's easier to blame or not blame, but look external than it is internal. I mean, like that work is deep, but so powerful.
Yeah, absolutely.
I know we're coming to the end of sort of our time, and I know you have a lot on your plate, so I just want to like respect your time. I want to share two quotes because I want people to understand that if you are out there and you're feeling imposter syndrome, like it's super normal and it's okay. But these two quotes are, I'm going to say funny, but funny in just like an interesting way. So this is the first one. the individual, Jodie Foster, basically said, it's the same way when I walked on the campus at Yale and I thought everyone would find out and they'd come take my Oscar back. They'd come to my house knocking on the door and say, excuse me, we meant to give it to someone else. That was going to Meryl Streep. And I was like, okay, people like Jodie Foster, right? Like very well-known people experience imposter syndrome. If you don't believe me, just Google it. You'll find a million quotes by people. So she thought that this Oscar needed to go to somebody like Meryl Streep. Now, Meryl Streep also has some imposter syndrome and says, you think Meryl Streep ends up thinking, why would anyone want to see me again in a movie? I don't know how to act. Why am I doing this? So I laugh because we think like, oh, if I was like someone else or, you know, like someone else could replace me, that person's probably having very similar feelings as ourselves. And I just think it's crazy that both of these individuals have these thoughts and they're both amazing people.
Yeah. Yeah. Those are two great quotes to juxtapose next to one another. It just shows that it happens and yet it's not unique to ourselves. And you know, if we can acknowledge it for ourselves and acknowledge it in one another and just like have open conversations about it, it just starts to like lessen the load we carry in our own heads.
I feel like I won't even say I feel like I know that you and I, because we've spent a long time actually talking about this out, not even for this, but just outside on our own. And there's just so much about it to like explore and understand and to help move through. But is there anything else that you want to like say just to everybody else out there as we wrap things up?
I think the only other thing that comes to mind, and I don't know, I always feel like I want to end on some kind of quick tip note, right? Because these things aren't quick fixes and we know that it takes the work. And yet sometimes, and I'll share from my own personal experience and what other clients have found helpful is whenever you do find yourself in that moment, the first step is just awareness, like we were saying, right? Name it to tame it, like first call it out. That's the first step. Because once you are aware of it, you can choose to do something about it. And sometimes even being able to, because right, imposter syndrome sometimes is like an all or nothing, like, am I good enough or not good enough? Sometimes breaking it apart to say, where am I doing really well? Or what do I know for sure? What can I control today about this situation? And then saying, where else can I improve? What else do I need to learn here? What skills do I need to develop? It starts to deconstruct and break down this big, hairy concept of, I'm going through this, to just smaller pieces that helps you manage it a little bit more seamlessly. Let's put it that way. So that's what I would leave our listeners with. And yeah, hope that today's time has been useful, fun, and hope to see you guys again.
Yeah. And I want to say thank you so much for like being here and just, again, we didn't really have like a big set agenda. So just being able to like just talk about this topic. And I know it will help so many people. And then I'm going to throw your website up, but where can people find you if they want to like continue this dialogue or, you know, explore working with you?
Yes. Yeah. So if you see, thanks, Erica. Yeah. If you see my website there, stephaniechenbanjo.com. It's a very long name. It's a long story behind that, but just go to the website. You'll find me there. We can continue the conversation. I'm on Instagram. I'm on LinkedIn. You can find me in any of those places. And I will look forward to seeing your name pop up in my inbox.
And you have something, I want to make sure I show it, but you have some mindset hacks, which are really good because I actually went in and peeked at them. And so you have some mindset hacks that people can go in and download and be able to start using today.
Yes, exactly. Yep. So if you follow that link, there is a tool that you can use that really calls out, because like, actually, just like Erica, you showed it, you modeled it brilliantly. When you say you find your imposter syndrome come up, your almost like signature, call it a story or a thought, is like, what was it? Like, who am I to do this? Or
who am I?
Who am I to do this? Right. Whereas like mine sounds a little bit different, but there's almost like the signature kind of self-doubt phrase that we all use. And so this is a tool to kind of uncover, what is your signature one? Where is it coming from? What type of thought pattern is it? How does it make you feel? What type of actions or inactions do you then take out of that place to really help you own that first step? Let's acknowledge it. How do we know when it pops up so we can name it to tame it and really figure out how to move forward from there. So yeah, if you go to that, you'll get access to the PDF, and hope you have fun with it.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, yeah, go download it. Stephanie's amazing, and connect with her on the social media channels. She's doing some really cool stuff coming up, I think. So, yeah, like go hang out with her. Just don't steal her from me.
Absolutely. Well, I look forward to more of these talks, Erica. Thanks for inviting me. I'm so excited you finally launched this. I know you've been talking about this for so long,
Yeah.
but you have such an energy, a passion, and a spark. And there's so much inside here that just, people need to hear. And so I'm so glad that you found this outlet.
Thank you. For our audience that's listening live, or if you're catching the replay, like type in #replay or drop any comments or questions you have. And like I said, if we didn't see your question come through, we will definitely go back and answer it or address it on chat. And then we will be hosting our next one on Wednesday, December 15th. So we're doing these on the first and third Wednesday of the month at 1 p.m. Central Time, which is 11 a.m. Pacific Time. And our next guest is going to be Mark Brewer on here talking about fear. And we're going to like deconstruct fear. So with that, I hope everybody has a great day. Stephanie, have a great day. And thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye.